I'd like to take another look at the counting problem. Do you remember the counting problem? We first ran into it way back when we were talking about diatonic intervals. And now I'd like to come back to it and look at it in a little bit more detail. Let me start by saying you may have noticed that as we've been going through all this material on chromatic intervals, I've been counting in two completely different ways. Whenever I'm talking about counting letter names, and let's take an example here. Let's take the example from G to D. Whenever I'm talking about counting letter names, I always count by starting on 1 with my first letter. So G, if I start on G, I count G1, A2, B3, C4, D5. And I come up with the answer that the interval from G to D is a fifth. I start counting 1 on G, I end counting 5 on D. But then, when I've been asking the question, how many half steps do we have between G and D, I count a completely different way. And let's just go back down here to the keyboard, mark off my G and my D, and when I count the number of half steps from G to D, I start counting G 0, G sharp 1, A 2, A sharp 3, B 4, C 5, C sharp 6, and D 7. So I get the answer that there are 7 half steps between G and D. And remember, I actually, when I write it out, I write it starting with the 0, just to remind myself that I'm counting 0 on G. But this is really confusing because now we are counting in two completely distinct, separate ways. When we're counting letter names, we count starting on 1. When we count half steps, we count starting on 0. And this is hard to remember, and it's an easy mistake to make. And I wish I had some kind of great mnemonic or memory aid or song or something that helped us remember that, but I don't. So we just have to remember that when we're counting on letter names, we start counting on 1. When we're counting half steps, we start counting on 0.